Have you ever seen a transfer deadline day in the middle of the transfer window? Well, of course, your answer would have been no, but with the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules, it seems that June the 30th has now become exactly that. But what exactly is profit and sustainability, and why is it causing such controversy? Well, essentially, PSR is the Premier League's set of financial rules that prevents clubs from losing over £105 million across 3 seasons. The idea, at least in principle, is to regulate financial superiority and stop clubs from excess spending. Any player that is sold from a club will be put on the books as profit, with youth players representing what they call pure profit. So for example, when Lewis Dobbin moved from Everton to Aston Villa for £12 million, and Tim Iroegbunam went in the opposite direction for a similar fee, the clubs were able to put this £12 million on their books as pure profit, while spreading the cost of the player that they'd bought across 5 seasons, so they would only pay 2.4 million of that in the last PSR year, and therefore this would mean that they came away with essentially £10 million of pure profit. For players like Minter from Newcastle, who they bought and sold within the same PSR window, obviously they would still get the full amount, but the amount that they paid for that player would already be on the books, so the 30 million that they did receive would not go down all as profit, and instead it would be around £24 million of profit. And it is these youth player transfers like that of the one between Villa and Everton that are one of the biggest problems with PSR in my opinion. The term sustainability would suggest that the rules are aimed at making clubs solid and stable over the long term, but what kind of message does it send out if the main and most efficient way to maintain financial integrity is then to sell the players who you've produced through your academy? That seems a bit counterintuitive to me. In fact, not only is it the most efficient way for clubs to make money to help with PSR, it's in fact the only way that many clubs who are close to that limit have been able to comply, as we've seen over the past few days, because youth academy players, obviously as I mentioned, go down as pure profit, so it is the most lucrative way to make money to comply with that rule. And essentially rewarding clubs with a better PSR standing for selling those youth players is only really going to turn academies into, one, football's version of a human trafficking scheme, and 2, it's going to make them completely redundant because there's going to be no players breaking through in the first team because clubs are now just going to be developing those players with a view to sell them as soon as they're worth anything. And that's been shown with the deal for Kellyman as well, who went to Chelsea, I believe, from Aston Villa for about £19 million without making a single first team appearance. And one of the most poignant examples of this exact issue that we've seen over the past few days is Newcastle, my club's sale of Elliot Anderson to Nottingham Forest. The 21-year-old is arguably the best academy product that Newcastle United have produced over a long time now, let's be honest, and he was starting to show the kind of potential that would have allowed him to grow with the club for at least another good few years. And yeah, granted, maybe the club shouldn't have let it get to the point where they had to sell a player like this to comply, but we'll get more onto that point a little bit later. And it just doesn't sit right with me that clubs are being forced to sell their homegrown players in order to essentially keep the best players at the club, because otherwise it would be those players who they're having to sell. And in fact, it's not only selling the best players that's the problem, it's if they did not sell these youth homegrown players, then they wouldn't even be able to progress and have any ambition for growth at all, really. And I don't only think that this deterrent from developing homegrown talent is a problem for the football clubs themselves, but I think this actually could begin to cause problems all the way down the youth pyramid, from academies all the way down to maybe even grassroots level in the future. As we know, the pathway into professional football is already cut through as it is, and of those who make it into academies, even less ever manage to go pro in any capacity. So with this newfound incentive for selling youth players, I can honestly see a world where the academy system just becomes a less seismic version of the professional game, with clubs buying players, youth players from other clubs at an age where they would still be classed as homegrown once they're fully developed, and therefore this would further decrease the amount of coaching and scouting that a club does in its local area, and it would probably also shrink the grassroots game, let's be honest, because that dream of becoming a pro footballer would be slowly getting further and further away. Eventually in academies we could start to see less players be given a chance to reach their full potential, and that would probably lead to more players falling out with the game completely. As we've seen, there's been problems with Premier League clubs and just releasing players without any sort of help for mental health in the past. So I think, to be honest, we could see a lot more exodus of players falling out with the game completely, and that would have a knock-on effect for the lower levels of the professional game, like League 1 and League 2, and also the non-league pyramid as well. And then we move on to the anti-competition argument, and the allegation that the PSR is essentially just a scheme to protect the Big Six and allow no other club to really challenge that and become part of that Premier League hierarchy. The argument from the Big Six clubs and some fans is that PSR affects them in the same way that it affects other clubs and to the same extent, which on the surface is true, but if you look a little bit deeper underneath that, then we can say that that is not the case at all. With these clubs already having an advantage over the rest of the clubs in the league in terms of squad quality and also revenue streams as well, this essentially just means that the gap to the rest of the clubs can no longer be closed. These clubs firstly don't have to spend as much money because they already have the squad quality to be able to cope. Secondly, they have more assets to sell to comply with PSR should they need to. And thirdly, the amount of TV deals and revenue stream, as I mentioned, that they get means that they're never really going to be in trouble with PSR at all, because all that doesn't go down as profit. The biggest case studies of this in effect are the likes of Newcastle, Aston Villa, and even the likes of West Ham, essentially all of those clubs who have the ambitions of breaking into that upper echelon of the league table. Taking a closer look at Newcastle's situation in the 22-23 season, qualified for the Champions League for the first time in 20 years, albeit massively overachieving. But yet this season we found ourselves desperately having to try and sell players to comply with this PSR, and that including lots and lots of rumours around our top players who were the ones who got there in the first place. And it's not even really the fact that Newcastle have had to sell players to comply with these financial rules that is my main problem. In my opinion, the issue is that despite the fact that we've worked so hard and managed to avoid doing so, it's the main players and the ones who are signed to get us to the point we are now are the ones who are being touted for moves away. The likes of Isak, Bruno Guimaraes and Anthony Gordon have all been touted for moves away in the past few weeks. And yes, you may look at that and think, well, you haven't actually had to sell them to avoid a points deduction, so what's the problem? Well, one look at the rumours that were swirling around the players near the end of that PSR window and you can see what the problem is. You had Isak linked to Chelsea, Bruno Guimaraes linked to Manchester City, albeit with a release clause, and Anthony Gordon linked to Liverpool twice over the past few weeks. And the one thing in common with all of these rumours is that the buy-in club would have been one of the clubs from the Big Six. So firstly, what sort of system are we in where in order to comply and just be sustainable, a club is having to sell their best players, like we've seen recently with Aston Villa having to sell Douglas Luiz. And secondly, the Big Six know that the clubs below them are now going to have to sell their best players in order to just be sustainable. So they're now actively looking into that and actively trying to exploit it as well. And let's be frank, this dominance of large clubs throughout the footballing world isn't something new. We've seen this most commonly in the Bundesliga with the likes of Bayern Munich, who were dominant for the past 12 years before Leverkusen toppled them this year. And they essentially just cherry pick the best players from the rest of the teams in the league to keep themselves on top. And it seems that these PSR rules that the Premier League has set is going to turn the Premier League into a similar sort of structure to that. And is that really what we want from what is classed as one of the most competitive, if not the most competitive league in the world? I don't think so. Surely if the idea is to allow each club to be competitive and have that ambition to push on and become part of those upper echelons of the league table, then a model where the Big Six fall under the same umbrella as the rest of the clubs when looking at financial rules isn't the best one, because they've already been the richest clubs in an era where they were more free to spend money. So essentially now we're just restricting the rest of the league to not be able to do that and just allowing them to stay as far ahead as they are. And in fact, it only appears to be getting worse with the new rule being implemented across the next couple of seasons. That'll see a club spending on players capped at 70% of their revenue, unless the club isn't in Europe, and then this will be up to 85% of their revenue. So if they're in Europe, then they get 70%, whereas if they're out of Europe, they get 85%. Again, this will essentially just mean that the smaller clubs with less revenue aren't able to catch those bigger clubs. Now, this rule was unanimously voted in, and I can understand actually why clubs have voted for it, because for the Big Six it means that no one can really catch them from below unless some serious sponsorship deals go through. But then again, if a sponsorship deal costs too much money, there's now a rule as well that means that will be looked into and possibly punished. So you can't really win if you're a club who's outside the Big Six. And then for those clubs who are established in the Premier League, maybe mid-table, or those who expect to be in a relegation battle, this essentially means that the Championship clubs who are coming up aren't going to be able to compete when they come to the Premier League unless they have some serious revenue streams coming from somewhere. But for those Championship clubs, this will make the ambition of getting to the Premier League seem further away than ever, because even if they do get there, the likelihood is they're just going to get relegated again straight away. And we could end up seeing a league with the Premier League where 17 teams are always the same, 3 go up and 3 come down, and it gives no chance for any sort of change. And then again, you might think that, well, clubs can just start doing more shrewd business. But the problem with that is if clubs do start doing more shrewd business, then we're going to see a model like the Bundesliga where the bigger clubs just go, oh, well, he's a good player, so we'll take him after a year, and then no one's going to be able to catch up. It's just a bit of a mess at the minute, isn't it? So what was the solution to all of these issues? Well, I'm going to be honest, I don't think anybody really knows. We need to find a model that regulates financial superiority and doesn't allow clubs to just spend willy-nilly, but we also need one that allows that gap to be able to be closed and allows the ambition and competitiveness of the Premier League to stay. Otherwise, we're going to end up needing a fairy tale season like that of Leicester in 2016 for a club to even break into the Big Six hierarchy for one season, never mind for a sustained period of time. This clearly isn't a quick fix that's going to be done overnight, and it's obviously going to take time, but to me it feels imperative that at some point in the near future we need to see some sort of confirmation from the Premier League that they're actually looking into these set of rules with a view to change. Because if we keep going in the direction we are, then we might as well just allow the Super League breakaway to happen, because we're going to end up with a situation where the big six teams in the Premier League end up in their own mini league anyway, and the rest of the teams are all going to stay the same because any club coming up from the Championship is going to have no hope of staying there. And with that, we come to the end of the video, so let me know in the comments down below what you think about the Premier League's PSR rules and whether you think they need to be changed, because there might be some people out there who don't think these rules need to be changed at all. But if you do think that they need to change, let me know in the comments whether there's any ideas that you have that might see the Premier League become more competitive again, like we've seen in past years. But other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.